So, have you ever had a conversation with somebody and it's just like it doesn't kind of add up, or you're not sure, and it's like, ugh, you're kind of thinking there's probably more to the story, but you're not even sure what questions you would ask or how would you figure that out? So, if this has happened to you, it can happen a lot when parents are talking with school staff, and the school staff may, explain something or say, actually, we have to do it this way, or this is what prevents us from doing this. And you're just thinking, I don't know, is that really how it goes? So, I am Charmaine Tanner, and as an advocate, I want to make sure that you know the rest of the story. And the rest of the story that we're going to be talking about today is what happens when you want to get some specific educational records and be able to look at those before your upcoming IEP meeting. And the response that you get from the staff may be, well, we do have 45 days before we have to, show you those records. And it's like, really? What? I don't know. And then it's like, what do you do? Right? So stay tuned, because we are going to be talking about that scenario today. We are going to problem solve it. I'm going to give you some additional help in that area. And drum roll, we also have, I can show you the banner. Towards the end of the show today, I'll be sharing with you 2 freebies, free resources for you. One is a letter template that gives you 28 specific kinds of educational records, and you can decide which ones you want to ask for. You can ask for all of them. And I also have a second freebie for you today. It's a records checklist to keep track of what you have and what's missing. So later in the show, I'll be giving you that link. So stay tuned. And in the meantime, say hi. Hey, Laura. She said, Charmaine, do they have to provide records before mediation as well as before IEP meetings? Yeah, so if it has anything to do with like IEP meetings or hearings, and a lot of times mediations happen before hearings, you need to be able to see those records, and we'll talk about that specifically. So thanks for asking. Hey, Anita from Virginia. I hope you guys are warming up out there. Anita is one of our parent trailblazers. And if you're interested in being a trailblazer, let me know. So let's dive into the rest of the story. Because, and my Giphy's not working. Why is she not coming to life? There we go. There is more to this story, right? So this is the situation or the scenario. So the parent makes written requests to review an educational record before an IEP meeting that's pending. And the district responds by saying, well, we have 45 days before we have to gather these records. Now, what do you guess is a common reaction by the parent? So if you're told, well, we got 45 days, what do you think might be some typical reactions from parents when they hear that from a school official? And I want to welcome our live people and also our replay people. So keep typing in your questions because we'll be responding to those. What I've noticed as an advocate is that typically the parent becomes frustrated because it's like, I really wanted to see that, piece of document in their file. And they go, I don't know, I guess we'll have to wait 45 days before we see the educational record that I'm requesting. And that's where this is only part of the story. And I think what happens so often is that as people, right, when somebody we see, is in kind of a, I don't know, an official position, and they make statements and they tell us how it is, it's like, I don't know. I guess they must know. I felt that way often when my son Dylan had, his every 6-month appointment with a cardiologist, and the cardiologist would say something, and I'm like, I don't know. You're the cardiologist. But then I would ask more questions and look things up. But it's really hard when somebody emails you a statement like, well, we have 45 days before we have to do this. It sounds like that must be, right? But no, there's more to the story. And so Laura says, go on without it. Yeah, you don't want to delay the meeting, but there's things that you can do before it. So we'll talk about that. I think what you're saying is what most parents would do, right? That they do not have to provide this. Yeah, some more parents would think that, right? And a lot of parents would say, well, I don't know. I guess we'll just have to have the meeting. Christy, hey there, she said I would reschedule the IEP meeting until I can review the records. They generally would rather give me the records than have to reschedule. So yes, see, that's another great strategy that you can use too. So thanks, and keep typing in your tips and your thoughts, because that's what makes our show even richer when we hear from more people. So now, if I can remember here, the other caution I have is to make sure that you always check with your state regulations for timelines to see if they have a shorter timeline than what any federal laws or regulations would say. And this is really important, and we'll get to the specific law that a lot of districts quote when they say that 45-day timeline, except if you're in states like California or other states that give you even more rights, and they have a shorter time frame. So you need to be aware of your state regs. Like I know in California before, my guess is they still do it this way, is that if parents requested records, the district had to provide them within 5 days. So that's like a huge difference, right? So always make sure you're aware of your state guidelines. So here are some of the facts in the story. That FERPA you might hear a lot of or talked about. So FERPA stands for the the Family Educational Records and Privacy Act. And in FERPA, it does say that the educational agency shall comply with a request for access to records within a reasonable period of time, but not more than 45 days after it has received the request. So this is where districts are coming up with kind of that flat statement. Well, yeah, you requested records, but we have up to 45 days. And that's part of the story. And we'll talk about the rest of the story here. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that you'll see things like reasonable period of time written in different language, statutes and regulations. And it's like, we know, right? Reasonable is up to debate as far as how people define that. But the problem is that if we only look at FERPA, then we believe the district and we say, oh, shoot, I guess, we'll just have to wait. Well, the rest of the story is IDEA in their regulations, they say they require the agency, which is like the school district or the charter school or whatever, to comply with a request to inspect and review records without unnecessary delay. And I put this bold, before any meeting regarding an IEP or hearing, and in no case more than 45 days after the request. So this is my understanding as an advocate. My understanding is if a parent requests some educational records so they can review them before the IEP meeting or the hearing, or to me, the mediation, the records need to be shared before the meeting, even if it hasn't been 45 days. So, the other thing that I wanted to point out with the language in the regulation from IDEA that sometimes parents don't understand, or teachers, is that it talks about that you have the right to inspect and review records. The IDEA regulation doesn't say specifically you have a right to get free copies of all your child's records. And so in the letter template that I'm going to give you the link for in a little bit here, in the letter template, it does talk about not only are you requesting to review them, but you would also like copies of them. And we'll talk about that little bit of copies and how many you want to request and how much you do or don't want to pay for copies. So this is the important part, is that yes, oops, I got the wrong thing here. Yes, FERPA, says that districts have 45 days, but then you have to know that IDEA speaks to, you should be able to review those things before you go into your meeting or your hearing. And even though it doesn't specifically say mediation in this IDEA regulation, my advocate opinion, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice, my advocate opinion would be yes, that you could still be afforded those records before you go in. And Christy says, I think New Jersey requires parents to receive all documents and drafts that will be discussed 10 school days in advance. So see, that is like really nice. There's a lot of states that don't have any like shorter timeline than that. And so for sure, like Christy said, you want to look those up and know what they say. Amy says, so when you say records, do you mean their entire file, entire educational records? Great question. Thank you, Amy. So when we're talking about records, it can get confusing, because some people will say, well, I want my child's file. And the school will think, oh, they're asking for the CUME file. And the CUME file, depending on how your school does it, usually has like your child's, it has like one sheet that has your child's attendance, tardy days, report card grades, whatever. They might have a few papers in there, but it's not, usually the CUME file from the school does not have all your child's special education records. So that's why, and let me see if I can bring this up. I can show you, hopefully, the letter that I'm going to give you the link for. So let me show that letter to you now. So this is a letter, and I'll give you the link here in a minute, but so you can see the letter a little bit better. So what it is it will come to you as a Word document that you download. And then wherever the yellow highlighted places are in the letter, those are where you need to personalize it with like your child's name, your name, different things like that. So let me give you the link. So if you go to iep.today /specific records, plural, request. So iep.today /specific records request. And I can scroll down here and show you. So what this letter has is it has 28 specific things that are considered your child's educational records. And like I said, you can decide, which of these you want to request. You can use this letter as it is and request all 28 of them. It just depends on your purpose. And then it gives some language at the end of the letter too about wanting to hear back from the district, and you give a certain amount of time. And so this you will get if you go over to there. So let me stop this. And so, like I said, it depends. I think one of the things is if your child has been in special education for many years, I don't know if you want to go back, to the beginning of time when they were in kindergarten or first grade or maybe preschool and have all of those records sent to you, or copied for you, or you go in and look at, because that would be a lot. So basically, I talk about looking at what the purpose is of the record. And if you just want some data on, how the teacher is figuring out their progress report and how they're saying, yes, your child's making progress, and you want to see the actual raw data, you could just ask for that. I mean, you don't have to ask for this entire list of 28 things, right? If you think there's a possibility that you're going to file a state complaint, go to mediation, have a due process hearing, then, and this again is an advocate suggestion, I'm not an attorney, but if you're thinking of doing any of those, kind of additional dispute resolutions process, then I would say maybe go back 3 years to begin with, and request records from that. So in the letter that you'll get, the letter template, it does give a date from, like, you want the records from January 2018 to present or whatever. So you can use that letter template, and because it comes as a Word document, you can just go in, insert the dates and delete things that you don't want to use or whatever. But yeah, those are great questions. Chrissy says, one fishy excuse I've heard from a district director was that because the information had not yet been discussed as a meeting, it was not yet part of the student's record. Isn't that interesting? And so that would be one of those situations where I would say, really? I've never heard that before. Or you could just be nice and say, wow, I would love to know more about that. Can you share with me the policy or the regulation that says I can't see this information ahead of time? I mean, you look at all the draft IEPs that are sent to families, and they haven't been discussed yet at a meeting, but you can certainly request to get that beforehand. So yeah, so it's interesting, the little bit sometimes that parents are told, right? when it comes to really understanding about our um, our rights when it comes to, and I think I'm like discombobulated today. So let's go back here and see if this will share. I don't know. I think my PowerPoint, because I stopped sharing it before, wants to maybe not come. So anyway, the point is that you need to, especially when you're looking at record request, is to not only have the school district look at the language of FERPA, but they also need to look at the language of IDEA. And I don't know why the other kind of warning that I had for parents is that if you use a letter like the one I'm going to give you in that template, you need to know that you're going to be triggering the school staff, most likely, because the language at the beginning of the template has some like legalese language in it, and that is there because if you are in a situation where you're needing to kind of perk up the alertness of the staff to say, I'm serious and we're not letting this slide by, that those beginning paragraphs in the letter template are going to be like, uh-oh. And so you want to be careful with that, right? But I guess the reason why I really like this letter template is because it specifically addresses things like the emails that have your student's name in it or your name, and even if it's just emailed among staff and not to you or whatever, those emails are part of your child's records, and you have the right to inspect and review those. So you just need to know that, I guess, when it's, this specific, when there's some legalese language in it, it's going to be kind of more of a step that you would take when you're really, like I said, trying to increase the awareness on the staff's part that this is a serious concern that you have. The other thing is, if you just want some copies of these and it's not like this, you're not at this adversarial part or point in your conversations with the school, is to look through that list of 28 and pull those out, the ones that you really want, skip the legalese language at the top, and just send a simple email saying, I don't have these in my files. I would love to have a copy of them. If it's low key like that, there's usually no problem, and they will, email you an electronic copy. So let me see if we have more comments over here, because yeah, Christine says, not sure I really want to know what those emails would say about me. I know. And what's interesting is you think like, it's like, they're not going to give me all this. But if they are smart, if they are taking their advice of the school district attorney, they will be honest and they will share all of those emails. I remember a specific example of a story years ago when I was working with a family, and we asked for the, records and gave them the list of things that we wanted. And like they delivered, the school district delivered this like big box of papers. And in there were emails and comments made about one of the parents that were like totally against like HIPAA rules as far as privacy with medical issues and such. And like we were so flabbergasted. It was like they like actually put this in there. And yeah, I think it's because the school district attorney told them, you need to be upfront. This is there. This needs to be shared. So you'll be surprised. Now, the other thing is, you probably won't be surprised that maybe there's a lot of things you asked for that you didn't get. And so that's why I have this checklist. And let's see if this cooperates. So I made this checklist, and it has all 28 things, and it tells you, to, mark off the ones that you received, see which ones you're missing. Some advocates will say, just ask for it one time, and if you don't get it, you don't get it. I think you need to at least go back a second time and say, thank you for these items. I appreciate it. I just noticed I'm missing these items. Please send these, or allow me to come in and inspect and review these. So anyway, this checklist will also be a freebie that you get if you go to that link. So what other questions or comments? I think the important thing is that you want to keep track of important documents. And one of the things I think is common for us to forget about at IEP meetings is if we sign, a release of information, and I have a whole nother show on that. Or, we sign the meeting notes or whatever you sign at the meeting. So many times we don't get a copy of that. So we need to get in the habit of, whenever you sign something, and, especially at a meeting, an in-person meeting, right? It gets kind of like taken away and, put in the folder, and you didn't get your copy. So everything you sign, for sure, always ask for a copy of that. And so the better job we do of keeping copies of our kids' records from the beginning or from this day forward, the less that we have to ask for. Now, there's a caveat with that, because just because you think, oh, I got copies of that, I don't need that stuff. However, it can be interesting. I've had this happen too more than once, where we requested records, we looked at the IEP, and my goodness, there was some amendments made to the IEP after the team met. The parent had no idea about. They were sitting right there in their educational records, but the parent never knew about it, never got a copy of it. So even though you think you have everything you need for your child, it is good to go back and look at those records that the school district is keeping and see, do they match yours, or have some things changed, been deleted, added? So Amy says, I have heard, though, that you should request at least once. Yeah, because, like I said, and you just want to be careful, because if you get hard copies, paper copies, it's like a ton of papers to deal with and organize, right? And in this day and age, most of all the records are going to be available electronically. So if you can get electronic copies, there's a system that you can use, and we talk about this in a different video, of how to organize your electronic copies so they're easy to find in your computer, your phone, whatever. So yeah, but like I said, you don't necessarily want 12 years of records to deal with, right? And Anne Marie says, the virtual meeting hasn't been getting signatures. And that's another interesting thing that came up recently. And we were saying, well, if the staff wants, the parent to agree that, a certain team member doesn't have to be there. There's supposed to be a signature from both the parents and the district are supposed to agree to that in writing. And so sometimes you'll hear, well, we're at a virtual meeting, we can't do that, but there are ways that the school can send the parent the document, and do like an electronic signature and email that back to the staff, or the staff can mail the paperwork to the parent prints it out, signs it, emails it back. So don't let COVID be the excuse that people don't have to sign documents. Signatures are still happening. And actually, and I can pull it up, I think it was June of this past summer that OSEP sent a letter out to districts saying that electronic signatures would be acceptable during, the pandemic. So that's another one of those, the rest of the story. Yes, you can still sign things. Heather is another trailblazer. Hey, Heather. She said, I found that it has been fairly easy to just make reviewing his records a routine thing instead of waiting for an issue to develop. Yeah, I think as much as we can be proactive, like I said, that, if you can kind of keep up with all of that record review or record request or looking at the records that you have, and make sure that they're current, then it doesn't become a huge, where's my red flag? A huge red flag when a parent has to send a letter being really specific about what they need. Oh, yeah. So Anne Marie says, yeah, DocuSign. Right. I mean, you look at people that have closed on houses during COVID and haven't been in the room and are doing it electronically, right? And your district just has to have, some kind of a program like that, software that can do. Chrissy said, yes, they have sent it to us and we did electronic signature and sent it back. Yeah. Abigail, hey, how are you? She says, last year at our IEP meeting, it was decided that my daughter needed a one-on-one para across all settings. I had to keep asking for the final draft of the IEP. It was written as one-to-one para as needed. I had called another meeting about the final draft. Yeah, and that's why it's so important, Abigail, and you are totally right on as far as making sure that you get that copy of, what's called, in some places, the finalized IEP, and go through and check that again. I know sometimes it's like the meeting is done and we're like, yes. And we're like so relieved, right? But we still have to kind of do some final steps after the meeting to make sure the language is how you thought it was. So I'm so glad, Abigail, that you called for another meeting to get that clarified and hopefully reworded, right? Because otherwise, yeah, it just like slips through and it's like, shoot, I didn't even know that they wrote it that way. And that's why it can be helpful too, if you have a friend to look over your IEP, with kind of a fresh set of eyes, and they can pick up on things that maybe aren't explained well enough in the IEP. Anne-Marie from South Carolina, she says, do you routinely get records if moving or changing schools? I think that's also a good idea. The school district, your new school district, will email the previous school district and ask for records, and sometimes that's a real slow process. So if you have your own copies, they can be electronically and you send them to your new school district, that can help kind of speed up making sure everything's going to be in place when they start in the new school. Corey, hello. It's our Trailblazer Day. She says, when you ask for records, do you ask for specific things or the whole enchilada? So Corey, I was showing earlier, I have a template, and I think you probably have it in the Trailblazer group, but if you go to this link. So I have a template that lists 28 different things that are considered educational records. So you could look at that template and decide which ones, you're interested in, having. Just know that, technically all the district has to do is let you inspect and review records. It doesn't say they have to make copies of it. But I don't know necessarily if you want hard copies. I think it's easier if you get electronic version. If you do, and sometimes I like to print certain things out. So if you do want some hard copies, know that the district can charge for copies. It's supposed to be like the going rate in your community for copies. So usually I check with like the grocery store or the library because usually they're the cheapest places to get copies in town, and tell the district, well, the grocery store and the library only charges 10 cents a copy. I don't know. So I would be willing to pay up to 10 cents. The other thing is, if it's a financial hardship to get hard copies, then there's a clause that says that the district needs to be able to provide those to you, without any charge. The one thing you want to know about charging is they cannot charge for the amount of time it took, some administrative assistant to make the copies or to retrieve all the electronic documents. They can't charge for the time. They can't make you pay for that. So those are a couple little tidbits about records and copying. Yeah, do you ask to review or copy? Yeah, so that's the thing. I would again be specific with the time frame that you want to look at. What the regulation says, and my understanding as an advocate, is that they're supposed to let you inspect and review. And so usually if they follow that strictly, then what they'll do is a lot of times just gather all, hard copies, and they'll give you a conference room and a stack of records that you can look through. A lot of times they'll have a staff person sitting there with you. I guess, I don't know, so you're not going to steal records or something. I don't know. But yeah, so that's usually what happens if they, want you just to inspect or review. They also could give you a flash drive that has all the electronic copies, and you could, put that in a computer while you're inspecting and reviewing them. But like I said, these days, it's just so much easier to do it electronically. And a lot of districts will give you, or if it's a problem, you give them a flash drive and say, just, upload all the records on this flash drive, and then I'll come pick up the flash drive. But you want to be purposeful about why you're getting these. If, like I said, if it's for due process, I would go back at least 3 years and have all of those. If it's just a few things that you need for an IEP meeting, then just ask for that, because otherwise you can get boxes and boxes depending on how old your child is. And so Anne-Marie says, yes, verbiage is important. Hopefully the statement was included in the prior written notice. Yeah, and that's the other part, that I think gets overlooked a lot is, what was decided, what was rejected, and all of that needs to be documented, and why they accepted or rejected your request in a prior written notice. And Abigail says, sadly, doesn't always stop after the IEP meeting. Thank you for all the information. Yeah, I mean, it's like, getting a well-written IEP is, do I have anything here? Time to celebrate, right? It's like, finally, I got a well-written IEP. However, I don't know where my caution tape is. However, you have to be cautious because that's not the end. So a well-written IEP is the beginning, and then you have to be following up and make sure that it really gets implemented like it's written. I often joke with parents saying, we need to have little badges that say IEP police, because it often falls to the parent to make sure things are really happening like they're supposed to be as far as what the IEP says. So that's like another hat that we get to wear, right? And Heather said to Anne Marie, I just make an annual thing, not just before a change. Yeah. So, that could be, every January or, whatever, like have like this day or, this month or whatever, like this is the time I go in and look at records and kind of get it updated. Hey, Angie. She was told they would need to grow someone just to make copies. So, like I said, they're not required to make copies. They're just required to let you review and inspect the records. But if, I don't know, it doesn't seem like they would have to hire a certain person just to give you, retrieve your records. And like I said, I mean, it should be electronically available, and then it's just like clicking on all these attachments and sending them to you. So yeah, I would question more about the reason why you're not able to get those. And Corey says, when you make requests to review, how quickly should they make them accessible? Conspiracy theorists, would they remove things? Yeah, they can. I mean, and there's no way, right? I mean, we're not going to be able to always know that. And that's why Heather's strategy of just making it an annual thing to do is really helpful. And I mean, this is like a really detailed way to do it, especially when you have a bunch of stuff. But one thing that you can do is make a table of contents of everything that's in their file right now. And then a year from now, when you go back, you check and make sure all those things in your table of contents or your list are still there, and you look at what's new, write those things down. But yeah, I mean, like you might not have heard earlier, Corey, I was saying usually if school districts are being advised by a good school district attorney, they will share everything, even if some of it gets them in trouble. So don't assume they're not going to show you everything, or don't assume they're, misplacing things. Sometimes you'll be surprised by everything you get. But yeah, we won't know if they took something out, usually, right? And look at Alabama's rules, Corey. FERPA, which is the Privacy Act, gives school districts up to 45 days to gather the records up. However, IDEA regulation says before an IEP meeting, before a hearing, parents have the right to have access to those records before the meeting happens, even if it hasn't been 45 days. So if you hear 45 days, people are quoting FERPA and they're forgetting IDEA, because IDEA says before a meeting, if you request those records, you need to be able to have access to them. And Anne-Marie, the reason a return call versus a response to an email, a phone call isn't documented. Oh, exactly. So, those are those, and I need to, somehow maybe make a list of them someday. But those are things like we have to develop the habit for. After every phone call, after every in-person verbal conversation you have with staff, you always want to follow that up with a written email and say something positive at the beginning. Summarize, and if you can bullet point it, that's even better. Summarize what the conversation was about, what decisions were made, and then at the end of the email, I always suggest that you write something like, please respond within 3 to 5 business days. If any of this is inaccurate, otherwise we'll consider this as an accurate summary of our conversation. So you give them the chance to say, wait a minute, no, that's not exactly how I saw it, but you get a specific time frame that you want them to respond it, because otherwise it can be months later, right? So you always want to be specific with that. Christy says a well-written IEP is a first step. It then must be implemented. Exactly. If your student does not have the communication skills to actually tell you what happens, you have to rely on the adults to be honest, which is not always the case. Exactly. The other thing that I've seen as a benefit for your child being included in general ed classes is if your child either doesn't want to talk about what happened at school that day or has difficulty being able to retell that and express that to you, knowing other classmates can be really helpful because they can kind of be the source of, oh, this is what we did, and the science fair project is due here, and she told us to make sure. So you can get some inside scoop from their classmates when they're in general ed classes. And the other kind of, there's many benefits for kids being included. The other benefit is that there's less abuse, restraint, seclusion when kids are in general ed classrooms. So sometimes parents feel like the self-contained room is a safe spot. Not necessarily so, but that is like a whole nother show. Angie says hire someone. Yes. Yeah. So having that new set of eyes, I know that's one of the things that I do with parents that hire me as an advocate is to, be able, I have this color coding system that I use, but I also type in specific questions that we want to ask the staff about this point in the IEP. And so then when you get to the IEP meeting and you're going through page by page, you see your questions right there. You don't have to try and think, shoot, I was going to say something here and I can't remember. So yeah, there's specific ways that you can really prep for your meeting. And if you, can have, if you have the funds to hire somebody to help you, that's always great. But there's also people, friends that can maybe be helpful for you too. Let's see. I'm going to show this link again. So when you sign up there at iep.today/SpecificRecordsRequest, you'll get the letter template as the Word document that you can go in and personalize with your child's name, your name, things like that. And you'll get that records checklist where you can check off the records that you have and just see at a glance what you're missing. So let me know if we have any more comments. I'm going to take a drink of water. If you think of questions later, just come back to this post and type them in because I'm always checking so I can come back and answer them. Next week is the first of the month, the 1st of March. How can that be? And traditionally, the first Thursday of every month, we have a Q&A session, and that's what we have planned for next Thursday. So you get to bring questions about whatever subjects, concerns, issues that you have, and then collaboratively, as an audience here, we share tips and ideas with each other. I learn from you guys, so I hope that you are always contributing here to our group on our Facebook page, because that just makes the conversation more rich. And I don't have all the answers and I don't have all the ideas. So it's always fun to learn from each other. So I appreciate you. I appreciate the time and effort that you put into advocating for your child, because it's making a huge difference, not only for your child, but for all the other kids coming after them. So keep on keeping on. I am Charmaine Tanner, and we will be back next Thursday right here, noon Mountain Time. Take care.